Hello and welcome to your latest news catch-up. It is Monday. We've had a busy old week in the world of sport, so let's crack on. The fourth test between England and India kicked off on Thursday. The good news is it went into a third day. The bad news is that is as far as it went. England opted to bat first. They changed their lineup. They dropped Broad and Archer. Archer, it turned out, had an elbow niggle. Broad went, Best came in, and they played an extra batsman, which obviously makes some sort of sense given they've struggled massively with their batting in the second and third tests. It didn't pay off for them. They lost by an innings. They made 205, Stokes made 55, Lawrence recalled, but playing in a completely different position, made 46. Indian spin bowlers picked up 7 of those wickets. India then went on to make 365, helped by Pant, that incredibly charismatic wicketkeeper, who made a brilliant century off not very many balls. And then Sundar Washington was unbeaten on 96. He ran out of partners, which was quite soul-destroying, I'm sure, for him. And then England were bowled out for 135, offering very little fight in the second innings. Lawrence made 50, but again, he ran out of partners, so he was the last man out. Very few other people offered much in the way of resistance. Now, the series is over. India have won it 3-1. They're going through to the World Test Championship at Lord's this summer. COVID obviously depending, to play New Zealand. England finished 4th in the table, but behind those two and Australia, despite having played significantly more test matches than anyone else in the time period. The biggest, obviously, talking point afterwards was England's rotation policy. Now, let's just get one thing straight. These players have been in a bubble since last summer. The bubbles are mentally taxing, we know that. The bubbles are also limiting their ability to play warm-up matches and time in the nets. So we're not talking about ideal conditions for sort of world-class matches at the moment. Now, where England, we feel, have gone wrong, I say we loosely, the press generally agree. My personal view is I have no issues with rotating the players at the moment. Because of COVID, the schedule is condensed. Because of the bubbles, the schedule is more demanding than ever. And it is the way in the world that they want to play in the IPL. We just have to accept that as England supporters and deal with it. And accept that getting exposure to top players is actually a good thing and will develop them all as cricketers. And obviously, if they have that financial security, maybe they'll play on a bit longer and who knows what. But, here is the but. England's policy just didn't seem very well thought out. Let's take the examples of Jonny Bairstow and Dominic Bess. Jonny Bairstow has been in and out of the England team over the last couple of years. He came in with much fanfare, he was the wicket-keeper batsman, played really well, got a few double centuries. His form went, he was dropped, then he was dropped from having the gloves, then it was, will he come back as a batsman, will he be a keeper, is Buttler a better keeper? You know, from a mental point of view, he's been messed around. He's been shafted up and down the order as well. He comes back into the side for Sri Lanka. He's a brilliant, generally, player of spin. He's got a good record on the subcontinent. He plays very, very well in those 2 matches in Sri Lanka. He's then sent home for a rest. He then has an absolute nightmare journey back, having been rested for the first 2 tests. He then does 10 days isolation by himself in a hotel room, and then he goes straight out into the middle for the 3rd test. Now, needless to say, he didn't play very well. Roll on the 4th test, and he ended up with 3 ducks out of 4 innings. Yes, he played well in the first innings, which was great to see, but it's not really much return. And now, of course, we're talking about, is his form gone again? Should he be dropped again? You know, should he even be playing for England? Well, this is utterly ridiculous. Like, why are we even discussing this? What did we expect? He's gone home for 3 weeks or however long. He's probably had limited training in that time. He's had no time in the nets. It's not like he's gone back to his county for a couple of matches. He then comes out and literally walks into the middle to face the new ball because the openers haven't lasted very long, with no warm-up matches. Are we expecting miracles? I mean, It just doesn't make any sense. Drop him for the whole series, or rest him, I should say, for the whole series, or play him for the whole series and rest him somewhere else. I mean, you look at, like, Buttler. Why did Buttler go to India for one test? Rest him for the whole thing. Give folks 4 matches. Like, it just makes absolutely no sense for Buttler to go through that isolation period in India for one match. Now, onto the subject of Bess. Bess played in Sri Lanka. He did okay. He leaked runs, but he did get wickets. He played in the first test, but it was his second innings performance in that first test that the England team, the England sort of management team didn't like. He was leaking runs, he was bowling too many full tosses. They dropped him. Now, they've dropped him for Moeen Ali, which is fine. He's another player who's been messed around by the England management, but whatever. He's a good spin bowler and a good batsman. Fine. But they knew Moeen Ali was going home after that second test. That was when he was due to be rested. So they sort of needed to ask Moeen if he was willing to stay before they played him in place of Bess. Because if they knew Moeen was going home, we've got the issue where, therefore, they're always going to need to call on Bess in the 3rd and 4th matches if they want to play that second frontline spinner. And then you're playing a young guy who's struggling for form, and then you've dented his confidence by dropping him. Can you see why this is making absolutely no sense? So they played Moeen. They asked him on day 4 or whatever it was whether he wanted to stay, which he didn't. You know, his flight's already booked. His family are expecting him home. He's barely seen them. Fair play. He pootles off home. They choose not to play Bess in that day-nighter, the first match in Ahmedabad, which, okay, the last time India played a day-nighter, the ball really swung. You've got the pink ball, you've got the lights, you've got Broad and Anderson, so it makes some sort of sense-ish. But you're always going to need that second spinner, at least in the 4th test. And by now, you've turned to Bess and said, Moeen Ali's better than you, you're not playing well enough. You've now turned to him and gone, God, we don't even trust you enough on spinning pitches in India. We'd rather play a seamer than you. Oh, but let's just toss you the ball and see how you get on in the 4th test. You've had, again, no warm-up matches in between. You haven't been able to go back to your county and find some form. You've literally just been sitting there as water boy with sort of confidence issues, and then off you go. So, needless to say, he didn't have a brilliant test. Where are his figures? 17 overs, none for 71. Yeah. He needs some time at his county. He needs to go off. He needs to work on his game. And he needs to regain his confidence. And England then need to trust him if they want to play him. They need to give him a run in the side and not chop and change. And with this rotation policy, this is the issue. Lawrence played at number 3 and then he came in at number 6. Like, where do they want to play him? Make a decision, stick with it, give these players time in their position to make a name for themselves. But yeah, at the end of the series, I mean, we know Root plays well against spin. He looked pretty tired by the end of it. Bairstow just needs some time batting. Yeah, and then we've got, obviously, people like Lawrence who've come through and look quite good. Sibley's look good in parts, Crawley's look good in parts. Burns looks like he needs to go back to his county for a little bit. Obviously, Jimmy and Broad always get the job done. Archer looks like his injuries need to be managed. And Leach looks all right. Nothing spectacular, not one of the best in the world, but certainly steady. And then as for the wicket-keepers, you imagine they'll recall Buttler. They seem to take the slightly better batsman over the slightly better keeper. We know Folkes is probably the best keeper in England right now, but it looks like he's going to have to play second fiddle to Buttler, and it looks like Bairstow will probably never get the gloves again, because at this rate, he can't. They're not even trusting his batting. So that's the Test series, England versus India. We've got ODIs and T20s coming up. The first T20 is this Friday. It's a day-nighter. While we're on the subject of cricket, the women have been in New Zealand. They've just completed a 3-0 whitewash in T20s, and that means they're on an 11-match winning streak when you count completed matches. We're not counting that washed-out semi-final. So, yeah, so they're doing well, which is great to see, and long may it continue. Now, of course, the men have a full schedule for this year. We know what's confirmed. They've got New Zealand and India back here in the summer. They've got the T20 World Cup in the winter, followed by the Ashes. They've got a very busy schedule. The women, as of yet, have no schedule at all. We don't know when we'll next see them. This has been a problem with COVID, and it's quite pertinent that we're talking about it on International Women's Day. The men's sport in general has come back, has been rescheduled, has got going, has more funding behind it in order to do COVID testing and put these players in bubbles. Women's sport is lagging behind still. For example, we still don't really know what's going on with the Women's Six Nations, as one example. So yeah, work to be done there, but hopefully we will see the women cricketers in action again soon. Speaking of the Six Nations, this was obviously a weekend off, but we have the issue of France versus Scotland. I told you I'd bring you updates, and here it is. The latest is they are talking about playing that match the weekend after the tournament is due to finish, which is about the 26th of March. That's obviously great news, because playing it in July is ridiculous. It makes a mockery of the tournament. Playing it midweek may just hamper Scotland unfairly when they haven't done anything wrong. The issue is, obviously we always finish the Six Nations on Super Saturday with all 3 matches. So obviously playing a further match a week later means Super Saturday isn't as sort of influential as it should be. Where it actually leaves the tournament, Wales are currently unbeaten. So if they go on to beat France on that Super Saturday, they've won the Grand Slam. France-Scotland becomes a dead rubber and not that interesting. If France beat Wales, then suddenly that dead rubber is very interesting because France will probably be going for the Grand Slam. If Scotland were to win, you could have a scenario where Wales, Scotland and France are all on one loss and it comes down to bonus points and points difference and various things. So I guess what we've got to hope for is a French victory on Super Saturday, and then we get a bit of a showdown in Paris on the new final weekend. So that's what's going on in the rugby. Just a quick note, Saracens players, as we've said, haven't had much match time because they've obviously been relegated from the Premiership and their division hasn't got underway yet. It's much shorter than the Premiership's going to be, just 1 match against each team. But they did get their first match against the Pirates underway and they lost, which was brilliant for the game in a way. Everyone loves an upset. They obviously didn't play their first team, they didn't have all their England stars, but nonetheless that certainly shakes up things in the lower divisions, so that is quite good fun. Right, the other big sporting event that was going on this week was the European Indoor Athletics Championships. It was taking place in Poland. It didn't get through unscathed from COVID. The Polish men's 4x400 team pulled out on the last day. We lost a couple of other stars. There was a COVID outbreak, basically. We still don't know the extent of it. Luckily, it pretty much happened on the last day. So from that respect, the tournament obviously managed to continue. I have to say, I listened to the tournament director give an interview on BBC. It wasn't great. It wasn't what I would want to hear reassurance as an athlete or a fan. And certainly if the IOC are watching, they're going to have some very big questions. His view was they're wearing masks, they're being tested, they've worn their masks they've worn their masks as soon as they finish their race, blah, blah, blah. But of course the issue is, he's saying, oh, we've been tested, so they're clear to go. Well, we know that being tested doesn't necessarily mean you don't have COVID. You need to be tested over a sort of 10 or 14-day period. We also know from simply the cameras at the event that the athletes were not always compliant, not always their fault. But, for example, you know, they were hugging and embracing after races. They were embracing into teams with, obviously, their friends on the circuit. If, for example, a 60-metre race was going on at the same time as the high jump, compatriots might go and embrace because they can see, you know, their colleagues doing well, and so on and so forth. But yes, away from COVID, Britain did very well. Keeley Hodgkinson, she's an absolute sensation. She's only just turned 19. She won the 800 metres, which was great to see. Jamie Webb won bronze in the men's version. There were medals for people like Jody Williams. Remember her, that absolute teenage sprint sensation, unbeaten in a ridiculous amount of races as a teenager in the juniors. She's never managed to translate it fully to the seniors for various reasons, including injury. 200 metres is her preferred distance. She ran the 400, she won bronze. She also won a silver in the women's 4x4. It'll be great to see her on form come Tokyo, and it'd be great to see her and Dina Asher-Smith forming a really strong British women's sprint duo. If you want an interesting interview, go to Twitter and find Mason Thurlick. He gave one of the most honest interviews we've yet seen about these new shoes. We brought you news of them last week. They were on display all over the shop in Poland. It looks like there's a high jump version, it looks like there's a triple jump version. They're everywhere, and we still don't really know exactly which manufacturers have them and exactly which athletes have them. Mason said in his interview that he's spoken to compatriots, to friends on the circuit, and said it's so unfair that if you're limited now because you're locked into a 3 or a 5 year contract with a certain manufacturer, you haven't got the shoes and you have no hope. He's saying the shoe could give you 10 seconds. We didn't see loads and loads and loads of records fall. We didn't see world records going left, right and centre, but we did see a lot of personal bests. Obviously, it's hard to know where the athletes are because we're coming off the back of a COVID year. We don't know who's had access to training, who potentially has done better out of this because they've had more time to train, and who potentially hasn't had access to facilities or coaches, or who's had maybe niggling injuries, maybe has used this time for small surgeries, etc, etc. So it's very hard to judge what form everyone should be in, but needless to say, the shoes are definitely having an impact. One more British performance to bring you that's worthy of note, the hurdles, the women's hurdles. Cindy Semper and Tiffany Porter, the sisters, got silver and bronze. Tiffany Porter, let's just say, coming back after having a child and competed in a mask. So absolutely inspirational on both of those fronts. So that's the athletics, that's the cricket. A couple of other things to bring you. Since we're on the subject of International Women's Day, Clarissa Shields, American boxer, she beat Marie-Eve Dicaire to become the undisputed championship in 2 divisions, the first ever women or male boxer to do that. So that is a pretty epic performance from her. And Roger Federer is making his comeback. Remember, he called his season very early last year when COVID broke out, used it to have knee surgery. He's on his comeback trail now. He's playing in Qatar this week. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. Right, that's just about everything for this week. Just a reminder, we've got F1 pre-season testing coming up this Friday. We've also got Six Nations this week, and we'll have plenty of other stories to bring you. So we will be back next Monday with another roundup. Have a good week, guys. Enjoy the sport, and I'll catch up with you next week.